Hello, very beautiful community. Let's talk about Elon Musk's support for Donald Trump and what issues of legitimacy and power and maybe even political freedom that raises. Quick announcement, there's going to be a long form question and answer session that's coming probably tomorrow. It's coming slowly because of my limited time windows each day to sit here and answer questions, as is my great pleasure to do. But unfortunately, I can't do it as much as I would like. So that's probably coming tomorrow now. And if you want to watch it, you may need to skip around or put aside 2 hours for it. Elon Musk. A quick aside that I think is worth mentioning, and that is that as somebody who is neurodiversity literate, even though I'm not neurodiverse myself, I have enormous physical empathy for Musk, because I can see all the 77 ways in which he dramatically struggles with his neurodiversity at many levels, including just the level of communication. But he also struggles with it at a cognitive level. It structures the way he thinks in a way that's very challenging for him. And is part of his enormous gifts, but it's also something that's very painful for him to be stuck with. Now, this raises, of course, another question about neurodiversity. There's a controversy in the neurodiversity movement, and that's whether you can talk about people's neurodiversity unless they have been positively diagnosed with it and are then open to discussing that in public. And the answer is actually that no, that's not ethical, with two exceptions. And the biggest exception is political power. When the way somebody handles or mishandles their neurodiversity has an impact on the lives of millions of people. If that's the case, their right to privacy about this doesn't go away, but it gets outweighed by the overwhelmingly more powerful claim about public interest. Therefore, ideas like the suggestion that you shouldn't discuss the neurodiversity of the ex-UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, I can tell you as a political philosopher, might sound reasonable and appease an instinct of political correctness in us. They are outrageously misguided, right? There's no contest there. The public's right to know and public interest dramatically outweigh this, because this is a person who was talking about how they would use nuclear weapons and so on. Putting this aside now, let's get into the issue with Musk, which is not an issue with Musk. It's a structural issue really for anybody in his position. What is less important in this chat is that Trump has said that Musk is giving him $45 million a month. Musk has denied that, pointing out that that's not the correct amount, that it's not going to Trump anyway, or at least not directly, but it's going to a super PAC. That does raise very important issues, which we won't talk about today, about money as speech, right? And what it means for a political culture to take money to be speech, when in fact it is not possible in any human culture to argue convincingly that money is anything other than power and not speech. But I don't think that's the central issue to discuss here. The central issue is that Musk owns a huge speech platform which accommodates a couple of 100 million users, whose algorithm Musk has access to and a modicum of control over, and whose algorithm Musk could adjust without us knowing anything about it, without us having any oversight over this. And there's something really worth laboring here, which is certainly an issue of legitimacy, and some people whose view I don't want to endorse in this chat might argue it's an issue of political freedom too. Somebody like the intellectual historian Quentin Skinner might come along and say, well, this is actually an issue of political freedom at the level of freedom conceived as non-dependence, not being dependent on the arbitrary power of somebody and their capacity to exercise it over us, whether they actually do so or not. That's a very important point, right? If I woke up tomorrow and I had the right to decide whether Jake Bro and Ryan Macbeth and other colleagues here on the platform get to stay on, even if I reacted to that bizarre new power that I had responsibly, and I said, well, it's none of my business whether they stay on this platform, and indeed I like them, so they should. Even if I responded to this bizarre predicament in that way, that'd still be a massive crisis of legitimacy. Why do I have that power? What if it is the case that today I say that I feel warm and protective about Ryan Macbeth, and I think he's a marvelous explainer, and any disagreements I have with him are reasonable, so I feel very supportive of his work. But what if I wake up next week and I decide that the brand of cigars Ryan smokes is one I disagree with, right? Because he doesn't age them enough, or the flavors are too bold, or something else. Even if I never get to that place, the fact that it is open for me to get to that place raises huge issues of legitimacy. I'm laboring this point, even if there might not be issues of political freedom, as Quentin Skinner might argue. And whether Quentin might be right here is something I'm going to leave aside for a longer chat on the philosophy channel. But the reason I'm laboring this point so much is that there's a tendency for the majority of people in the beautiful community to say, well, the problem here isn't the structural situation, but it's just Elon Musk. If Elon Musk were nice and he supported Ukraine and Kamala Harris, then there'd be no problem. But the answer is no, the very same problem would obtain, right? Most of you have a high degree of faith in my capacity to proceed with caution and procedural reasonableness much of the time, because you've watched me for so long, and you might feel that if Vlad were in charge of the X algorithm instead of Elon Musk, then that would be a much better situation. And I'm telling you, substantively, it wouldn't. Because even if I happen to run the algorithm impartially, including impartially vis-a-vis my own views, right? I didn't rig it to favor my own political preferences. The same crisis of legitimacy would obtain, which is that I am exercising arbitrary power, and even if what I'm doing happens to overlap with the outcome that could be generated by some kind of more impartial oversight over the Twitter algorithm, over the X algorithm, the point is that that overlap is contingent, and this stuff is still at the whims of some random person who may wake up and think one thing one day and another. So I'm laboring this so much because it's very important not to do what 9 out of 10 of us are doing, that is turning around and saying Elon Musk is a rubbish person and that's the problem we have. No. What we have is a systematic problem of our public squares not just being unaccountable and untransparent, but us not even having answers about what it would mean to make them transparent and accountable. Now, clearly, one part of the fix into the future is that there has got to be algorithmic transparency. That is to say, an international team of academics ought to be able to publish a paper about the X algorithm, telling us how it works, so that we can engage together with our political representatives in public debate about what we think is wrong with that, and then take the next step from there. So at least some things that we ought to be able to do that we can't do now. So this is the issue of legitimacy that's raised. It's the fact that one person who happens to be the richest man in the world, who owns a very distinctive and very large speech platform, has the capacity to control its algorithm without any democratic oversight, without us having any capacity to look in sideways and give over that perspective to experts to study. And the point here isn't that Elon might be doing this really badly or really unethically, or he might be using it to sell off democracy to a potential authoritarian. The point is that anybody exercising power in this structural situation, whether they're doing it more or less constructively at the level of their personal ethics, right, that any such setup will still give us a crisis of legitimacy, because it is enormous control, enormous power being exercised over our democracies that we cannot check and we cannot even see. So that's a real problem. And because that problem is one of the 4 biggest causes of democratic decline, right? The state of social media today, the other causes being the untethering of social bonds, structural exclusion, various political ideologies and psychic ideologies that make it so hard for us to push for the preservation of important democratic values on the basis of solidarity and the public good. But among that list, which could be continued, one of the central challenges we face is the state of social media. And that's the real problem we have discussed in this conversation. A quick remark about me personally, and why I am historically just very passively on X, but why I'm actually now changing my tack there and about to share more systematically, share more content there. Got a small account there. It's just under 20,000 followers at the moment. But I'm getting keen on sharing there more systematically. Why? Well, the first thing to understand for everybody watching is that whenever you make a decision about what platform to be on and what to do there, you've got to put your mental health and sustainability first, and only second questions of where you get good information and where your presence might do some political good because you're supporting some important cause. All of that is secondary to your mental health and secondary to you feeling that what you're doing there you can do sustainably, that you have buffers in place that are not going to destabilize you. So care about what you put into your body in the way you're present on a platform comes first. That's very important. I don't have problems of that kind, so it's easy for me to sort of just be on any platform without reflecting on how it impacts my mental health, because it doesn't. The reason I'm on Twitter is several-fold. First of all, what I've described to you as this crisis of legitimacy is ubiquitous. It affects all social media platforms. It just happens to be that it's worse on some platforms than it is on others. But there is no way of escaping it, right? If you truly wanted to escape it, you'd need to be off social media. There are big problems with the YouTube algorithm too. It's just that they are less obviously politically partisan than they are on Twitter. But they're different. There are different problems with the YouTube algorithm that absolutely conditions what content gets promoted and to whom. Another point that is very much part of my relationship with politics is my relationship with politics is effective and it's not expressive. So I'm not going to be boycotting some country's produce if I think the country's politics is bad, unless I feel that my boycott will actually do some constructive and effective good. If it's just about how I present to the world aesthetically, that's not going to sway what I do realistically. So the fact that I might not agree with certain conduct of Elon Musk's isn't going to undermine my desire to be there if I feel I can share a message that's responsible and can reach some people, right? And The very first substantive clip I shared on Twitter in just the last few days has got 250,000 views, so it's clearly worth it. Now, the other thing I would say is that I've forgotten what I was going to say. So I had one other interesting consideration about it being constructive to share some of my content on X, but I've forgotten it. So therefore, hang out here on the chat channel tomorrow for the long form Q&A, and thank you so much for being with me. Lots of love.